I'll give a couple warnings as I get started. One, I have 4 cats because I'm insane, and they are all here. I do not have an office door, so at any time they could just knock the webcam on the ground or the mic, who knows, and they will join us. There's also a dog here. So full disclosure, I typically work out of the DC office, but right now, like many Americans, I am actually undergoing a massive remodel in my house. I haven't had a dryer in 3 years, so I'm very, very excited that I'm getting my bathroom remodeled to have a dryer that legally vents outside up to code. And when I go home in a couple of weeks, I will have a remodeled bathroom and an actual dryer as opposed to line drying my clothes, which I've been doing. So very exciting times for me. While that's happening, I'm in this cabin in Tennessee. This is my first test of using Wi-Fi with video, so hopefully it works, but please do alert me if it is not working okay, and we'll make it work. I'll turn off my camera or something along those lines. So I also have a secondary title for this presentation. I actually think that America is currently in a pressure cooker situation. All of us are dealing with COVID in some sort of way. And whether that means that your adult children are now living at home with you for a number of reasons, and I'll talk about some of the data on that, or whether your adult parents are now living with home with you, or whether you are in really the hottest real estate market, one of the hottest real estate markets in the country, which New Haven is, looking at that and thinking about how much work you're currently doing while also likely schooling a child if you do have one at home. America is all trying to deal with this in new and innovative ways, and a lot of that has to do with their approach to housing and what they're actually doing right now to make their house work for them, as their house really has become a college dorm, a restaurant, their home gym, and the place where they're homeschooling their children. So let me jump into some of the data. I know that you have heard from Lawrence Yun before, so I'm not going to go over too much on the macroeconomics. The research that I do really focuses on survey data, both from consumers and also from members. It looks at demographics, and it looks at current changes that we're seeing right now during the pandemic. So jumping in, I will show you one slide. Unfortunately, my lock button is not working here, so we'll go this way. Okay. So looking at the housing landscape that we're seeing right now, we are seeing the highest closed contract activity that we have seen since 2006. It's truly an unprecedented time. We did not expect that the pandemic would truly have as deep of a V as it did for housing, and really saw that steep dip as we saw consumers move away, but then that very, very, very fast move back up. And part of that really has to do with people who took a pause in their transaction in the spring. They're now here in the market, summer and in the fall. But we also know that there's a lot of people who have had pent up demand for a very long period of time who weren't making a move, who decided for whatever reason, whether it's a low interest rate or whether it's just making their home work, even though it's not really working for them, that they were just going to stay put. But now with the pandemic, people are really saying, this is not working for me. I need more space. I need a different school district. I now have the ability to work remote, and I don't have to be wedded to a city center. And so people really are making the move. And I'll show you some of the data and the consumer trends behind that. With this, we do know that the typical list to contract time is 22 days. This is a national basis. I know that your market is incredibly hot. It is one of the hottest markets in the country. So there is no way that that is an actual number. I know that it has to be lower than that in your local area. It probably is a matter of days, if not minutes, that the home is listed before you do have a contract for that home. Right now, what we are hearing from members is that 3 in 5 members are actually saying the market that they're in is hotter than normal. And when we look at this, what we see is people who are outside of city centers are actually saying that the market is hotter than normal. So looking at rural areas, small towns, on a national basis, truly these are the places that are hot right now, outer suburb areas, as opposed to dense, very large city centers like New York City, like Boston, like DC. Those are the cities that are not necessarily saying this is hotter than normal. They are probably not saying that right now. What we do see is because there is extremely limited inventory, we do have the longest period of time, 102 months of year-over-year home price growth. This we have not seen, back dating all of our data period, which goes back to 1968, we have never seen this length of time of home price growth. And what that really means is that it's encouraging for homeowners. You suddenly have more equity in your home. You can make that move. But what it means for home buyers is that it's difficult for them to enter the market. And it's very hard for buyers who could be first-time home buyers, buyers who are on that lower income spectrum, the lower price spectrum, to find a place that is affordable for them to actually enter. They're probably going to have a multiple bid situation. They might get anxious, less patient during that process because they're going to have a harder time finding a home. And all of that means more stress on the agent and the broker side to really bring them through that transaction. So let's talk about some of the consumer data we have. We've actually been doing waves of research here, and this is very, very current research. This actually is from September. These are among people who are actually active in the real estate market. And what we asked them are basically, do you feel comfortable going to an open house? Is this a safe activity for you to do? And from their point of view, they're actually saying, yes, this is something that they do feel safe. 59% saying they're ready to go, 15% saying they have been active attending open houses. Now, an open house, of course, has been shut down in many areas. Some brokerages have said, this is not necessarily a safe activity, bringing multiple people into a house at once who are not in a family unit or in a pod that is quarantining together. We need to actually separate this out into listing activity. But from the consumer perspective, most are actually saying this is okay. This is something that I would feel okay doing. Just 9% saying I need assurance from my local government, and 17% saying I need a medical breakthrough. So knowing this, what we have seen is that we also asked a follow-up question here. Is attending a listing presentation outside of an open house, is this something that you feel safe to do? And we actually see an even higher share are saying that, yes, I do feel safe. 67% saying I'm ready to go and do this activity, 12% saying they're recently active, just 10% saying they need a medical breakthrough, and 11% saying that I really do need assurance from my local, state, national government saying that this is an okay activity. Now, I will say this is a survey that is actually done for a number of different businesses across the country. And it's compared to going to a movie theater, going to a restaurant, going to a sporting event. And what we see is that for the real estate activity, this is significantly higher than what we do see for other activities, even higher than going to the grocery store. So I think what this really speaks to, and we saw this very, very fast in the pandemic, is even back in March, before there was any inkling that this was an airborne disease and we really should be wearing masks, what we did see in the real estate market is that people quickly embraced masks, gloves, shoe coverings, cleaning between listing presentations, making sure that this is a safe activity and that people felt comfortable through this process. And it really, really speaks to how realtors embrace this type of activity to make everyone feel safe. Now, I'm going to say that we have seen focus group data on this as well. The focus group data is not published in any report. I don't have any slides on this, but I'm going to tell you what I'm hearing from consumers. From buyers who are out there in the market, they're feeling like this is safe, I feel okay, but there seems to be a distrust of sellers of the listing home that, is this really okay? I want some more assurances. I want to feel okay doing this. There's that same distrust on the sellers to the buyers. They want to make sure that they feel okay as well. And there's a lot of anxiety on the selling side. In those focus groups, the number one theme that I could really take away is that people are anxious. And it's not just the normal anxiety of, will I be able to sell my home? Am I going to be stuck with 2 mortgages? I don't know what I'm going to do. Is this the right time frame that I can sell this in? It's a really amped up anxiety that's there. So if there's any takeaway that I would have from those focus groups, it's really to reassure people what your strategy is, what your protocols are for agents, for yourself, making sure that everyone stays safe in that process, and just over communicating that information. I heard from one of the sellers who her home was listed for sale. She's in the Florida market. She physically stayed in the home while buyers came into the home and physically washed the home down behind the buyer who was still in the room. So that's the type of anxiety that we were hearing from people of saying, I have a new baby, my wife is pregnant, I feel concerned from some sort of health perspective. I need to make sure that I am okay. We also heard from the other side of the spectrum that they would ask buyers to wear masks in the home, but they personally would not wear a mask in their own home. So of course, there's that type of communication that probably needs to happen too, just to have an honest and open and safe environment in that transaction of what's going on. So again, very, very interesting dynamic there in those focus groups. No report there, but I do think that there's some interesting takeaways that really can be, learned from, of how we can make people feel more safe in this environment. What we're also hearing is that there is a lot of pressure to move sooner rather than later. 39% are saying that they are very anxious and ready to move sooner rather than later. We do not have a comparison trend line for this of wanting to buy sooner rather than later, but it does seem like a higher amount. This isn't something that we would have asked pre-COVID. So we asked a follow-up question here. And what we found is why. What are the reasons that they are ready to move sooner? More than half are actually saying that it's concern over their physical health. They are concerned for some reason, whether that's the density of their city or just saying, I need to move to a bigger space. Maybe it's overcrowding in their own personal home. We also found that 20% are concerned about social unrest. So maybe there's protests in their area saying, I need to move out of here as well. They're concerned about that, and that's a reason that they need to move. 14% are saying that they need to separate from the people they're living with. And I don't mean to make light of this, but I do think it's an interesting dynamic. There's been a lot of fodder that there could be a divorce boom coming out of this. I'm going to just say that perhaps this purple section, the pie chart, are those folks.
You can't put it all the way down.
The other thing that we're seeing is that 14% are just tired of looking at their four walls. I totally get that. Being now in a different space currently, I absolutely even feel that more, that I understand the tiredness of just seeing those same four walls. So I think there's a lot of people who are just saying, I have to make this move. I am absolutely tired of this. A quarter are actually considering a second home. Now, this is an interesting thing as well, because we know that the second home market, from data that we're collecting on a daily basis, honestly, is saying that the second home market is booming. People actually have more money now if they are in the top spectrum of the K-shaped recovery. They have cut their spending on, at the very minimum, gas to go to work, on clothes, on entertainment spending, cutting back their restaurant and bar spending, not going to movie theaters, to sporting events. Those types of things are pretty much off the table. So looking at how they're actually using their money right now, there's a lot of people who are saying, I'm not going on vacation this year, or if I am, I'm going on a much more affordable vacation. So why don't I consider purchasing a second home? Interest rates are at these historic lows, and this could be an opportunity for me to actually purchase a cabin, a beachfront property, and actually think about having a second place to live, especially if my office is currently remote. There's no intention of going back to work anytime soon into a physical office space. And the idea that perhaps moving forward in the future, my office will be more flexible. So again, this is a very different environment for people who are doing okay and actually financially better during this pandemic versus those who are not. And so there's a lot of people on that spectrum who would say, no, I can't either be bothered with a second home, or I just flat out can't afford a second home. But looking at that more than a quarter, I think that's an interesting market that is not only growing right now, that is likely going to grow in the future. The other thing that we're seeing is that, yes, I am spending currently on my remodeling, but there are a lot of people who are in that situation as well. You suddenly have the ability to work remotely from a different property to remodel that home, but you also have time to DIY those projects that you've been putting off, or you didn't ever even occur to you until you start staring at the same four walls for the last 7 months, and you realize, I have to make this move. I want to actually change my physical residence that I'm in. So we are seeing a growth there. One of the things that we're seeing is we actually asked a follow-up question here, or is this remodeling actually for you to enjoy your property, or is this for you to make the move? And I'm not sure if I put that chart in here. Yes. So we are seeing that 55% are actually saying, I'm going to improve the quality of my life where I'm currently living. But we also see that there's a solid share, 29%, who are actually saying, I'm going to make my home more attractive for me to actually sell this in the future and actually be in the home selling market. This is an interesting dynamic, and I'm going to show you some other data on this, but we're really seeing that sellers are starting to understand that if you want to sell your home in a timely time frame, and you also want to get maximum offer on that, you actually need to make your home look very nice. And a lot of homes have, it's an older housing stock in America, which we know because building has been at historic lows, but we also know that people have held onto their homes for an extended period of time. And so some of those homes really need to take on some projects before they are placed on that market if they want to be competitive in the home buying market today. The other thing that we're doing is we're actually surveying members, and we're doing this on a very frequent basis, going out to a large section of members. So I guarantee that you have received a survey from me in the last few months about what's going on with COVID, either from a policy perspective, looking at what kind of things that our advocacy department can lobby on, or just from a how is the buying market, how has the search process actually changed? What we are seeing right now is it is a different environment. From the member perspective, what they're saying, people are doing their homework online. They're looking at these virtual tours. They're looking at virtual listings. They're actually looking at virtual open houses in some areas. So we are seeing that there's a lot of homework online. When it comes to actually physically seeing the home, they're actually seeing fewer homes right now if they can find them in their price point. And that's really the key. When we look at 2018, so looking a couple of years ago, what we saw is that people were looking at about a dozen homes before they put a contract down. So quite a few homes before they actually had a contract that they were placing down. Last year, that shrunk in 2019 to just 9 homes. So there were fewer homes on the market. Inventory was even tighter, and there were fewer homes that they could actually view. Right now, what we're seeing is that if someone can find a home, they're actually being very strategic and only looking at 3 homes before they put a contract down. Now, that's kind of an HGTV dream to be able to just see 3 homes and to put a contract down, to have an offer, and to move in on Monday. Like, this is not a realistic time frame. And I think you would have laughed me out of the room or off the Zoom last year if I had said that people only 2 or 3 homes before putting a contract down. But we are really seeing this fast forward in this process for very strategic buyers who are saying, I have to find a home, I have to find it in this price point, and I have to find it quickly so that I can get out of where I'm living now. The other thing that we're seeing again is that half of members are actually working with potential sellers to help them DIY and get their home ready to sell. So either bringing in a professional remodeler or DIYing home projects so that people really can list their home quickly when it is ready to go and there's no delay in that process. The other big thing that we're seeing, and there has been so much talk over this over the last few weeks and even months now at this point, is that there is a change in where people are looking to move. You guys are seeing it right now in your market. You know that there's a lot of people moving from New York City, likely from Boston, to just looking at your market as opposed to living in downtown dense city center areas. At least 35% of members are saying that consumers are changing at least one home feature that they're looking for in that process. We're also seeing, again, that transition from the city centers into suburbs, small towns, rural areas, and then a shift away from multifamily into single family properties. Now, I'm going to say here, some of this is continuations of last year's trends, pre-COVID trends. When we look at last year's data, we actually found that a quarter of younger millennials, so younger millennials being in their about mid-20s, not yet hitting 30 years old, those buyers who are active in the market, a quarter of them purchased in small towns. Now, a lot of that has to do with housing affordability. A lot of it has to do with the available inventory that's there and just getting more home for your price point of downtowns that are filled with very beautiful condos, but they're luxury condos. The inventory is tight there and the space is tight. And so what we're seeing from that younger millennial population is that this really is something that they wanted to do already. They needed that workforce flexibility and now they have it. So we're really seeing this explosion of millennials and first-time home buyers who are saying, oh, I don't have to be stuck to the city center. I really can move with my family or my growing family out to a different type of area. And we're seeing that shift. All right, so I'm going to take a detour here. I'm going to go back into that kind of data soon, but I want to take a detour here to these protests because I talked about that 20% of movers are actually moving because of the protests. That is a reason that they are urgently moving from wherever they're living right now into a different area. So I think it's worthwhile to talk about them, talk about the connection to housing. There is a connection here, and I think it's worthwhile just to talk a few slides on it. So I've got 3. The first slide that I have is the homeownership rate by race. And when we look at the yellow line, what we see is that the non-Hispanic white homeownership rate is at 73%. So it's quite strong. It has rebounded since the Great Recession from the boom and the bust years, and it is back. What we see for the gray line, is the Black homeownership rate. The Black African American homeownership rate is at 42%. Just 42% of Black African Americans own their home in America. That gap is incredibly wide. Now, this is a chart that is just a snapshot from 1994 to 2019 annual data. This does not show the entire historical perspective of this, and I'm not going to talk about all of the many, many reasons why that gap is so wide, but I'm going to give you a few. One of the big reasons here, and we can see this push here towards a rise in the homeownership rate for Black African Americans and for Hispanic Americans. What we saw was a rise during the boom years, and a lot of these individuals, a lot of these home buyers were put into subprime loans, and they may have even qualified for conventional loan products, but they were given a subprime loan. Unfortunately, what happened, what we saw in the bust years, is that Hispanics and African Americans had double the rate of distressed sales, of short sales and foreclosures than white Caucasians did. And so we saw that they lost that home equity, they lost their home in that process, and they also lost the confidence that they felt in home buying that they could pass on to future generations. Now, this is a small snapshot from 1994 to today, but what I will say is that when we look at that gap in the homeownership rate between the Black and the white homeownership gap, what we know is that that is wider than what it was when it was legal to discriminate based on race before the Fair Housing Act started in the 1960s. That in itself is an incredibly disturbing fact, and we know that there's a lot of reasons behind that. One of the reasons that we do collect data on, and what we have seen in our own data that we're collecting among successful home buyers, is that African Americans actually have nearly 3 times the rate of denial for mortgages than white Caucasians, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans. These are successful home buyers. These are those who did eventually find a home to purchase, and those who found a lender who said, yes, your income is there. Yes, your debt to income ratio is low enough. Yes, you should be able to qualify for a mortgage. They didn't walk away from the process. So we know that the application process is tight. Credit is tight right now, but it is tighter for Black and African American qualified buyers who did qualify and successfully purchase a home than it is for other buyers out there. And that's just one of the many, many reasons that do feed into this gap in the homeownership rate. What this all means, this gap in the homeownership rate, is we know that home means so much to us. It truly is our everything. It is where we are spending nearly 24/7 of our life, probably more than we have ever expected to or wanted to perhaps even spend. But what we know is that homeownership is also the #1 way that Americans build net worth. We are historically really, really bad savers. We do not put money away like we should. Where we build our wealth, where we build our net worth, is truly through homeownership and through our home. This is fantastic for homeowners. It is great during these boom times that we see right now as home prices continue to go up and the equity in home continues to gain. But what we know is that there are so many Americans who are left out of homeownership that we see that gap, and that gap has widened over time, and it's widened since the Great Recessions. It actually widened since the 1980s. What we see right now is that for white non-Hispanics, the net worth is more than $170,000. And for Black African Americans, it's actually under $18,000. So that truly is an enormous gap, and it has a lot of implications for passing equity on to future generations for home buyers in your own family, and building your net worth into retirement, and perhaps even moving to a more affordable area in retirement and downsizing. So all of these implications mean really big cyclical issues in housing. So I show you these slides because, yes, there's a million reasons behind these protests. And I think it's worth noting, however, some of the housing contributors that do go into this as well. All right, so I'm going to move gears here very considerably. I'm going to talk about some of the demographic shifts that we're seeing right now. One of the big things that has been talked about recently in recent weeks is that 52% of 19 to 29-year-olds are actually living at home with their family members right now. 52%. That is the highest share of 19 to 29-year-olds who are living at home with their family members since the Great Depression. Now, there's a lot of reasons behind this. Some of these young adults may be young professionals with white collar jobs who no longer need to live in their very expensive apartments in their city center and are now at home with their family members in these fully stocked fridges and pantries and are back in their childhood bedrooms. That is absolutely one of the things that is happening. Other factors here, of course, is that many colleges went online this year, at least for the first semester. So students are attending virtually or some hybrid setting. And so we do see that as well. A lot of college students decided, I'm going to take a gap year. I'm not going to go to college this year if I can't physically attend in person. And so we do see a trend as well. There's also a lot of people who became unemployed during this pandemic. And we know that the job losses that have happened are actually more likely to happen among millennials. So this young adult population who is now at home with their family member, who may have been living independently before and is now at home. So all of these factors are converging at once. And that's some big implications for these homeowners, for these parents who are having these young adults with them. The other thing that is happening here is that we saw a lot of seniors who couldn't see their family members for weeks, for months, who may have still not been able to see them. But a lot of people are saying, I'm going to bring in my senior parent and I'm going to bring them into my living situation right now and move them out of senior care, senior centers. Now, there's some huge implications for that housing unit and whether that housing unit is actually safe enough and prepared to actually have this older adult with them, when we know that many of those bathrooms probably had all of the safety precautions with them, and these housing units probably do not. So that's probably one section of those remodelers of people who do need to remodel right now and are actually having to install these types of safety precautions. What I want to say on this is that we don't have good data on this yet. We're going to be releasing it in the fall towards November, but I do want to show you some data that we have from last year. What we saw last year is that 1 in 6 Gen Xers and 1 in 6 younger boomers did purchase a multi-generational home, either for aging parents or for adult children who either have boomeranged back or just never left. This has some really big implications for housing. One is that you're going to see that these adults who own this house, so likely the Gen Xer, the younger boomer, these sandwich generations, the panini generation, who has these older adult relatives with them and these older children with them, cannot downsize. This would have been a time frame in their life where they saw retirement in the horizon. They didn't have kids in their home and they said, I want to downsize. So we really see downsizing is a theme and a trend that we have not seen in a number of years. More than 10 years, I would say, we have not seen data that really suggests downsizing. The other implication here is that this adult relative who is taking care of these people, maybe they have to work longer. Maybe they need to take care of this mortgage for a longer period of time than they probably expected to. The other thing that we do see on the positive aspect here is that many of these adults, the adult children, even the older adult relatives, may have some sort of employment where they are contributing to the housing costs, allowing this family to buy a larger single family home, to pool their money for utilities, for the mortgage, and have some cost savings here. So we do see that positive aspect as well, as this family unit essentially takes care of each other and maybe even takes care of young children who could be in that house as well. So we do see this changing dynamic. Now, I will tell you, we'll have new data on post-COVID buyers come November. I'm not going to give you any inklings of the number, but I think that you guys can figure out where that numbers are going based on what I just said. The other big trend that has been talked about a lot is this baby bust situation. So we have more than a 35-year low in birth rates in this country. People cannot afford to have children. Daycare in many areas is $2,000 per month per child. That is significant. And it becomes very hard for a family to decide, let me add a second child into my home or just have a child to start with. So what we have seen is that the birth rates in this country have continued to drop. On this chart, what I'm showing is that back in the 1980s, 58% of home buyers did have a child under the age of 18 in their home. And in the last year, it was just 35%. So that change in home buyers is really mirroring the change in birth rates in this country. And so we're seeing that continual drop. What I do expect is that there's been a lot of fodder that we're going to have this huge baby boom coming out of this pandemic, that a kindergarten class 5 years from now is going to be named with girls named Pandemica. And I just don't buy it. I am very apprehensive on the idea that we're going to have a baby boom coming out of this. Sure, if you are two gainfully employed adults, and perhaps you do take advantage of this time working from home, but there has been so much concern over schools going hybrid and remote. If we are thinking about having this baby boom with second children being added into the house, I am a little apprehensive on that. The other reason why I'm apprehensive is that the job losses that have happened in this country really have been a lot of millennial generation, this generation that ranges from mid-20s all the way up to 40. And that generation would be the generation who would be having the children right now. And so I'm suspect that we're going to have this big baby boom when we know that the baby bust is really financial. So I don't know where we're going to land on that, but I will say there's some big implications here for housing. One is, do you need as much space if you don't have children in that home? And the second one, of course, is the quality and the convenience to schools is going to be different for those who do not have children in their home. The one big thing that we are seeing is a complete clearing of the shelters in many areas around the country. There was a lot of articles written that you couldn't adopt animals. You couldn't find an animal to adopt. You could be on a long waiting list to try and find a cat or a dog to adopt. So these are all the crazy animals who live in my house. And this is because I'm insane. What we do see is that there's a lot of people who have adopted these animals during the crisis. It's actually hard to find cat litter right now, which is kind of crazy, because there has been so many pet adoptions. When we look at this, yes, there's a connection to housing. And I know it seems crazy, but we really do see it in the data. For unmarried couples and for single females, it is more important to them as a home buyer to be close to a dog park, to have this fenced yard, to be in this area that's walkable for pets, for dogs, than it actually is to be close to good schools. That's crazy. That is truly a change in data that we have seen in recent years. It's also more important to buyers in rural areas and in urban areas to really be invested in their pet and to have this importance. But we do see that it changes the decision to buy altogether, because you don't want to pay pet rental fees. And it also changes the neighborhood choice and where people are actually looking. Suddenly the idea of where does the litter box go becomes very important when you do have a cat. All right. So there's been a lot of talk about having a divorce boom coming out of this. We've all been at home for about 7 months if people are working remotely, socially distancing, quarantining, doing what you can to really stop the spread of the pandemic. What we do see is when we look at the data on marriage rates in this country, when we look back to the 1960s, more than 70% of American adults were married. Today, just half of American adults are married. So that's quite a change in itself. When we look at this data, what we see is that the first-time home buyers out there are really mirroring this trend. We used to see back in the 1980s that more than 70% of home buyers were married couples, and today it's just a little than half are married couples. So really a big drop there. What we have seen is that there's more singles in the country today. And so you would expect more single home buyers. We did see this bounce in first-time single home buyers, and we saw it all rise as high as 27%. Unfortunately, it's dropped off to just 17%. And I think a lot of that has to do with housing affordability. It's quite expensive for a single female to be able to save for a down payment on her own and to be able to enter homeownership. On the flip side, what we have seen is actually a rise in unmarried couples purchasing a home together, the highest share we've ever recorded at 17%. We've actually seen a rise too in this other category, all the way up to 4%. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but it is the highest share we've recorded of first-time home buyers who are essentially purchasing as roommates. So a Golden Girls phenomenon, pooling incomes, pooling money for a down payment, and purchasing a home together. I think that 2021 is going to be the year of the roommate, and we're going to see a rise in this. And the reason why I say that is that I think there's housing affordability is still a huge issue, a really big hurdle to entering homeownership. But I also think a lot of people are tired of being by themselves if they are by themselves renting. And if they're in a roommate situation, they may just say, let's pool our money and let's go buy a house together. All right, so big question mark here is student loan debt. We have seen a drop in first-time home buyers, and it's been continual, and it has actually happened since the Great Recession. It is, when we look at first-time home buyers, what we saw is that they were pushed up, and we saw that artificial boost in first-time home buyers with the first-time home buyer tax credit, and went all the way up to 50% of primary residence buyers were first-time home buyers. What we've actually seen right now is that first-time home buyers are a little more than a third, so we really don't see too much of them in the market. Now, one of the huge hurdles for home buyers today, especially for first-time home buyers, is to actually save for a down payment while paying off their student loan debt and having their debt to income ratio in check. So I have a huge question mark here for student loan debt, because one of the first stimulus packages that happened actually brought the interest rate for student loan debt to zero. Huge benefit to student loan debt borrowers to be able to tackle the principal of their loan and pay off that student loan debt. However, they also automatically went into forbearance for federal student loans, and their lender didn't necessarily notify them of this. So unless they're following in detail the stimulus packages, you probably are not aware of this, that this is actually happening. So huge question marks here. If you're gainfully employed, and if you're a young adult, especially if you went to be one of the 52% who are now living at home with your family, this could be a huge leg up that you could pay off your student loan debt and perhaps save for this down payment. On the flip side, if you're one of those younger millennials who did actually lose their job and has student loan debt, you are in the benefited position that you don't actually have to pay your student loan debt for your federal loans right now. So I think this is a huge question mark of what's going to happen. Are we going to see this big benefit of people being able to enter the market perhaps 6 months from a year from now after they pay this down? I don't know right now, and I think that has yet to be seen. All right, so I'm going to shift gears yet again, and let's talk about the agent use. When we look at last year's data, we know that 89% of buyers are using an agent in their transaction. That's incredibly high. It's higher than what we have seen historically. Even if people are buying new build homes, the majority actually do have an agent who is representing them on the side. They absolutely want the negotiation skills. They want someone who they can trust and is honest and can actually walk them through this transaction. The big thing that's happening here is that, yes, first-time home buyers are low, but what we know is that people are staying in their homes for longer periods of time. So even if you're a repeat buyer in the market, you essentially act like a first-time home buyer because you haven't done this transaction in more than 10 years. And so you likely have no idea how this goes. And you really do need your agent to help you walk you through that process. Essentially, your repeat buyer is a first-time home buyer in this transaction, especially now during COVID. And I'll show you some of the consumer data we are getting back right now. On the sales side, 89% are using an agent to help them through that process. We see FSBOs for sale by owner, extremely low share, just 8% of recent transactions. People really do want this agent representation. It's incredibly important to them on the selling side to sell within a specific time frame, to price the home competitively, find a qualified buyer. But something that has been becoming more important to these sellers is actually finding an agent who will show them, what do I need to do to my home to make it attractive? How do I fix up my home for sale? That is a new dynamic that really has changed in the last 2 years, I would say, when we look at the data. It's actually become one of the top priorities that sellers do have from their agent is not just sell my home and price it correctly and sell within that time frame, but also what in the world do I do to my home to actually make it attractive to people? So the idea of staging, of course, but also just the idea of how do I fix up things that are broken in my home and how do I actually make it a more neutral type property that would be attractive to more people. We're really seeing that move up in the ranks, and that's something that I think is very unique for this time frame right now. When we look at agents during the pandemic and what we've seen from consumers right now is that buyers and sellers are actually saying that agents are more important right now. This is someone who they want on their side even more. Talked at the beginning of the presentation about some of the focus group data that we're getting back, about the massive anxiety that we're seeing from consumers. I really do think that it really comes down to anxiety, but also that urgency to really do this sooner rather than later. But also, how in the world do I navigate this market that's filled with virtual tours and virtual listings? I need my agent to show me, how do I stay safe? But then also, how in the world do I navigate this during a pandemic as the transaction really has changed? So we do see the reliance is even heavier now than it has been in the past. So what's next? I have a lot of question marks on this slide because I don't know what's next. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm going to throw out some themes of data that we're getting back, of things that we are seeing here. I think that there's a couple of themes here. One, everyone wants a bigger home right now. You want one home office, two home offices, three, maybe the third one is for your kids who are all homeschooling right now. The idea of McMansions is probably back. That seemed to be a passe idea for the last few years as people, were fine with their 2,000 square foot property. Now the idea of more space, more yard space for growing your own food, for having your own pool, really relying on your own property is very, very important. I threw this tiny homes on land here. I don't know if this is going to be a theme that moves forward, but I will say that there's a lot of people who are moving out of very small condos, dense situation, and they say, I just need the physical space around me. So maybe they're willing to actually move into even a small tiny home on land, 500 square feet. They're used to living in 400 or 500 square feet condos or apartments, and are just saying, I need the land around me. I don't necessarily even care about the size of this physical space inside. The other thing that we're already seeing is this idea of vacation home markets not being necessarily seasonally based. Not necessarily the beach is popular during the summer and spring, doesn't matter anymore. Now it's popular year round. Looking at rural areas that were just ski areas now being popular year round. People want this vacation home if they have the cash and can purchase it. If you have good broadband access, how does that stop it from becoming the primary home in the future? I don't know. I think that there could be some big changes here. People may keep their city apartment, their city condo, but still want this vacation home that really they end up living in nearly year round. The other thing that we are seeing already in the data, early retirement purchases. Retirement may have been 10, 15, even 20 years off for people, but with the interest rates today, people may actually say, this could be a vacation home. It could be a retirement home in the future. I'm going to go and make this purchase and make this investment now. I'll be in a better financial situation than if I had waited. The other thing that I think is a huge question mark is these things are starting to happen. We're starting to get early data back on this, early readings on this. We hear the anecdotal evidence from members in these markets. If these things continue to happen and happen in large waves, this is going to reinvent rural areas, traditional recreation areas, places that always had the local coffee shop. Now they're going to be pressured to have the Starbucks, to have the type of amenities that people are used to in city centers, the yoga studio, what have you. I'm not sure what that is exactly, but I think that there's going to be a demand for a different type of commercial properties within this space and different types of amenities as people do have this wave of moving to outer suburbs and rural areas. The big question mark here for so many families, more than 70% of kids started their school year online. Many schools are still hybrid, still all virtual. How in the world do schools come into play? I don't know. I don't have answers to this. I don't have kids myself, so I really cannot say from a personal perspective either. But I do think that there is a big question mark that if your kid is going virtually, does that mean that they have to be at that top tier school if it's already virtual? I don't know. I think that there's a lot of families who are grappling with this right now, and that's going to be a question mark. The other thing is we have seen a rise in tenure over time. Traditionally, what we saw looking back at the 80s, the 90s, is that people move every 6 to 7 years because something in their life happened and they need to sell their home and move to a different home. However, the things that traditionally happen were a birth, a marriage, a divorce, but we've seen a drop in birth rates, we've seen a drop in marriage rates, which means a drop in divorce rates, and so they didn't necessarily move. And so we saw a tenure go all the way up to 10 years. I have to say that COVID is the thing that everyone's life has absolutely turned upside down, or at least sideways. because something has changed in your life with that. And so perhaps right now we do see a drop in tenure moving forward. It's going to have to be a couple of years before we start seeing that data, and if that actually really does bring that drop in tenure data down. But we certainly see the demand is there. We certainly see that people are out there in the market. All right, that's my timer saying that I'm hitting the 45-minute mark. I have just a couple more slides. One is our forecast. I know that Lawrence talked to you in June, but I'll give you the current forecast that we have. We update this on a nearly monthly basis. At the beginning of COVID, there was a bunch of question marks, but what I can say right now is that this forecast is pretty solid. We are seeing the demand for houses are there. We do expect that existing home sales will increase. Probably see them at a higher level if we did see the inventory there, but we don't. That is definitely the sticking spot. With the inventory low, with the demand there, we do expect that home prices will continue to increase well into 2021, especially with the low interest rates, with the no expectation that these will increase. The Fed has said that there's no expectation. We are seeing that jobs are being added back in. We do see the unemployment rate should continue to drop incrementally. And GDP for 2020, it will end down because we did see that massive drop in GDP in the spring, but we are seeing rebounds in economic activity. So we do expect that year end, it will be down, but into 2021, we should expect a rebound in GDP. That was a lot of national data. To tell you the truth, on the demographic side, there's not a ton of local data that's out there for me to grab for you. But this website that we have here is interactive. It is fun to play with, and we have a ton of local data that is for economics on here that you can download. You can print off PDFs. You can view the data and play around with this clickable map, which is pretty cool. This is all of the information that I really cover, a lot of it there, but we have tons of researchers in the department, and they post new content on a daily basis that's posted to our blog and then cross-posted on all the social. So please do check us out. And all the reports that I talked about are actually free. So if you want to grab the full report, good nighttime reading for everyone's insomnia right now, but it is good that you can grab that all for free on the website. Thank you guys so much. And I think we have a little time for questions as well, if there are any.
Thank you so much, Jessica. If anybody has questions for Jessica, feel free to drop them into the chat. Or if you want to quickly unmute yourself and ask, feel free to go ahead. And once again, I am going to be sharing the presentation with you, so you'll be able to grab all those links that Jessica just shared. Don't see any questions, just some, a lot of some good information and thank yous.
All right, well, please do not hesitate to reach out either to me or anyone in the department, and we can get you anything that you guys need too. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thanks everybody for joining us. Bye.